Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is a call to order of the Finance Committee. Today is October, 25th. The time is now 6:32 p.m. In attendance, we've got myself, Committee Chair, Ms. Jennifer Perez, Committee Member. Online, we have Ms. Baptiste Perez, Committee Member, Mr. Albert Brenahan, Board Member. We've got on staff Marlene Siegel and her staff as well. And in person, we have Dr. Morgan. Okay, the first item on the agenda is approval of minutes dated September 13th, 2023. Do I have a motion to approve, please?
So moved.
I'll second that. Does anybody find any material errors of omission or omissions of note? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? Motion carries. Minutes are approved. Next item up is a projection of potential in kindergarten reduction enrollment 24 to 25 for the 24-25 school year and fiscal impact. Who would be presenting that? Would that be you, Ms. Siegel?
Yes, good evening.
Good evening. Thank you very much.
All right, good evening again to everyone. In terms of kindergarten, please hold on 1 second. My cell phone seems to have an echo. Bear with me 1 moment, please.
Yes, ma'am. Take your time. That's it.
All right, I am back and ready. Is everyone ready?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. You can proceed.
Thank you. So in regard to kindergarten, first let's examine the regulation. And in the document that I shared, there are 3 tabs. I'm looking now at the second tab, which is entitled Rules and New Entry Age for Kindergarten. Beginning with the 24-25 school year, children need to turn age 5 on or before September 1 in order to be automatically eligible for kindergarten. And this, of course, is a change from the current kindergarten cutoff date of January 1st. And so to start kindergarten in the new year, 24-25, next year, a child must turn 5 on or before September 1 of 2024. And if a child turns 5 on September 2nd of 24 through September 1 of 2025, they would, according to the law, enter kindergarten in the 25-26 school year. However, there are exceptions to the process. And so if a child does not meet the new entry cutoff date, the child may still be admitted into kindergarten upon 1, a written request from the parent or guardian, determines admitting the child to kindergarten would be developmentally appropriate. And I've been informed by our early childhood department that in Bridgeport, we use a standard assessment called the Brigance. Also, suppose a child is currently in a special ed class and is age 4 and will not reach age 5 by September 1 of 24. So in that case, the planning and placement team, the PPT, will review and or revise the child's IEP to meet the child's needs during the additional year of preschool, or the parent may submit a written request for the child to be admitted into kindergarten if the child doesn't meet the entry cutoff date, and the school may complete an assessment to determine whether admitting the child to kindergarten would be developmentally appropriate. And in the further guidance to parents, the regulations indicate if you believe that it is developmentally appropriate for your child to enter kindergarten, communicate with your elementary school to request an assessment for admitting your child to kindergarten. Right. So now before we look at data, I'd like to discuss some facts related to projections of any fiscal impact. First of all, the state ECS allocations are traditionally based on the October 1st enrollment data from the prior year. And so for next year, 24-25, we would expect the Alliance ECS allocation to be based on the 10/1/23 data, which in the current year was actually Friday, September 29th, because October 1st was a Saturday. And in view of the option that's available to each district to implement an exception process under the new law, based on written requests from the parent, the exact number of 4-year-olds who would be excluded from enrollment in kindergarten in September of 24 may not be known until May or June of 24. And as I've just indicated, there is an exception process whereby the parent may submit a written request and an assessment can be completed by the school to determine whether or not admitting the child would be developmentally appropriate. And so not every request for exception would necessarily be granted, would be based upon the results of the assessment. Now, the state would not know the actual kindergarten enrollment in 24-25 until October 1 of 24, after the district has granted exceptions and all eligible kindergarten students are reflected in the Power School or PSIS data. So therefore, we can presume that a fiscal impact, if any, would not occur until 25-26 based on the 10/1/24 enrollment. Now, as part of the planning process for 24-25, we will do what we do every year. We will make a projection of kindergarten enrollment. However, we will have to take into account a potential percentage for exceptions and determine the number of kindergarten classes to be allocated. Also, it's important to keep in mind that breakage across classes in a school does occur, and that's a factor in calculating the number of classes. So what does breakage mean? Well, the best way to describe it is to give an example. If there are currently 40 kindergarten students in 2 classes of 20 students, where the cap is 24 and we have 20 students enrolled, and kindergarten enrollment is projected to be 32 students, we would still need to have 2 classes. Those 2 classes would potentially each have 16 students, and we would still have to have 2 classes, even though there are now 8 fewer students. Next, it would also be expected that the state would take into account, when considering a funding formula, the breakage across classes in kindergarten that could result, and would require stability in funding to ensure maintenance of staffing for the kindergarten classes. And so before I move on to the final item, just in summary, where we are anticipating that our district will have a formalized exception process, and that it will be a process that each school can follow. We expect
Ms. Siegel, you dropped off. I don't know if you were still speaking, but you dropped off for about 30 seconds.
I think that was a technical issue with Teams.
Okay, could you just back up the last 30 seconds, please? With what you were
Yes,
saying?
absolutely. Yes, I'll try to go back to where that technical issue occurred. So we would anticipate, subject to decisions that will be made at the superintendent's level, that there would be an exception process in Bridgeport and consistent with the state law. And we would anticipate that there would be 4-year-olds, not necessarily every 4-year-old for whom an exception is requested, but many for whom the process would demonstrate that the child is ready developmentally to enter kindergarten. And so we would anticipate a number of exceptions and use that data to anticipate enrollment. Now, with regard to pre-kindergarten, it's important to understand that state ECS funding is calculated and intended for students in grades K to 12, not pre-K. The district is not funded through our state funding for pre-K classes or services. We are funded for K to 12. All of our pre-K classes are funded through state grants, School Readiness, Smart Start, and Discovery Magnet. And the Discovery Magnet operational plan that's on file at the state level mandates 3 kindergarten classes. Also mandates 6 pre-K classes. Now, school readiness, for school readiness, the allocation continues to be $108,000 per class for a teacher and a para, and that is grossly inadequate in 2023-24, and will be even more inadequate next year. In Smart Start, with 4 pre-K classes, the total allocation is $300,000 or $75,000 per class, which is even less in terms of capacity to fund. What's the average cost factor for a teacher and a para? $168,000 to $188,000. The excess cost factor is $60,000 to $80,000 per pre-K class. A few years ago, it would have been $40,000 to $50,000. Now it's $60,000 to $80,000. There is also not a supplemental allocation for equipment, materials, or supplies in the pre-K grants. And I have reported many times over the last several years that we have excess costs of well over 1.5 million. Currently, it's projected at 1.6 to 1.8 to be charged to Title I in the current year. So it's important to understand that when we speak about children who will be age 4 by January 1 of 25, who will be age 4-year-olds who will be age 5 by January 1 of 25, and therefore would not be eligible for kindergarten without an exception. When we speak about those children, if the parent wants to place the child in a pre-K class, there would have to be a seat in one of the funded pre-K programs, either a Bridgeport program or a community site program. Now, in terms of data, in the first tab, I presented in the top section the total number of kindergarten students provided to us by the Office of Data Management. And we present that in 3 columns to represent the regular ed or general ed classes, the special ed self-contained classes, and the bilingual self-contained classes. Keep in mind that there are English language learners who are receiving ESL services only based on their needs, and they would be in the general ed class. And there are special ed students who receive only resource services, and they would also be in the general ed class. So the header pertains to classes. Now, we have the kindergarten students in total, and then the current 4-year-olds, the children who will turn 5 by January 1 of 24, and then the balance. Now, in the middle section, I looked at classes, and in the top header here, I have a field for percentage of exceptions. So in this table, we're showing, suppose there are 0 exceptions, what could potentially happen? And keep in mind, first of all, that the special ed self-contained classes that I mentioned, those are multi-graded classes. So moving back up to the top, the numbers in the SPED column pertain to the kindergarten students who are graded as kindergarten, but they're in a special ed class that generally is multi-graded. Doesn't mean there aren't any classes solely with children graded for kindergarten, but usually it's K-1 or K-1 and 2. So moving back to the middle section, so those special ed classes are multi-graded. Therefore, I assumed that those classes would all continue. And the same for the bilingual classes, because due to breakage, even if one or more students were not eligible and didn't receive an exception, we most likely would still need to have that class. For the regular ed students, we have the kindergarten classes, the potential class reduction, and then the potential classes. So let's go down to the bottom, and you can see that currently there's actually 78 kindergarten classes, 70 general ed and 8 bilingual. And I wanted to show the special ed kindergarten students in the self-contained classes. So the middle section has those 15 classes, but again, those are multi-graded special ed classes. Now, this is showing that based on 441 students in pink in this first section who are 4-year-olds, 441, there could potentially be a loss of 18 classes if those numbers were basically the same for next year and if there were 0 exceptions. Also keep in mind that at Discovery Magnet, as I mentioned, their operational plan on file with the state for the magnet school mandates 3 classes. Now, in the bottom section, this table is similar to the middle section. However, now instead of showing the scenario where there are 0 exceptions and the maximum number of classes that could potentially be reduced, let's look at what happens based upon the percentage of exceptions. So if we have 50% exceptions, and what does that mean in numbers? Well, there are 441 students who are 4-year-olds, so that's about 220 students. So again, using this year's numbers, if 220 students received exceptions, instead of 18 classes as a reduction, it would now be 11. But I'm going to show you an interesting phenomenon because, and also I have a note here, I did assume, as I mentioned, that the bilingual classes also remain stable. So the special ed and the bilingual classes remain stable in both charts. So now I'm going to show you the interesting phenomenon in that if you look at my notes in purple in this column K, there are 8 schools that have either 2 or 3 classes now, and their class size is relatively lower than the class cap, meaning that we had to do that in order to keep class size at a reasonable level. So for example, if there are 2 classes planned and we're projecting 46 students, well, obviously that's 2 classes of 23. However, 23 is very close to 24, and even though 24 is the cap, 23 is a high number for a kindergarten class. And so generally in that type of situation, we would have 3 classes. So for example, at Barnum, we have 3 classes. At Black Rock, 3 classes. Tisdale and Winthrop and Marin, 3 classes. And then there are the 2 other schools, Hooker and Beardsley, with 2 classes. So what happens is, let's go up to 75%, and let's assume there are 75% exceptions. Well, now we're losing 8 classes. But if we go to 80%, it's still 8. And in fact, 90%, it's still calculating at 8. So why is that happening? Well, let's look at Barnum. So Barnum currently has 3 regular ed classes and 1 bilingual class. And as I indicated, we have the 3 so that we keep the class size at a reasonable level. So even with 90% exceptions, using the formula alone would indicate 2 classes. But we want the numbers to be reasonable in those classes. Generally, we'd like the kindergarten class to be no more than 20 or 21, certainly 22 at max. And in fact, if I go to 100% exceptions, it's still 8, because we in those schools that I've coded, even though this is showing a loss of a class, we would not really lose that class. Right? So the key for us is, it's probably around 65% exceptions to basically maintain what we have. And based on this year's numbers, that would be about 286 exceptions. So in summary, there isn't any way today on October 25th to predict what the number of exceptions would be. We will make a reasonable assumption because we have to produce register projections in the fall and be ready for allocation conferences in February. But there will be further meetings held at the central level under the superintendent's jurisdiction in order to devise the action plan that will identify the specific process that will be used and communicated to parents in accordance with a timeline and collection of data. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Do we have any questions, Ms. Perez?
Pass for now.
Okay, Ms. Baptiste Perez, anything for now? Okay, hearing none. I've got a few observations and questions. First, where did we get the number of 4-year-olds? How was that number calculated? Was it just those attending our programs?
Yes. So the number of 441 pertains to 441 students currently in kindergarten, right, who are 4 years old, but will turn 5 by January 1. So these are children who were eligible for kindergarten in the current year. I'm sorry, can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. These 441 4-year-olds are currently in our kindergarten classes. They are in those classes because they were eligible for kindergarten in 23-24, which means that they will turn 5 by January 1 of 24.
Okay, I got it. Thank you. So all things remaining equal, which never does, those are the numbers of potential impacts based on today's data should nothing change. Now, the ECS, that's not the only amount that's going to be lost. We're going to also lose, what are the other 2 fundings? ooh, I'm blanking right now. Alliance district grants are per pupil as well, correct? Alliance and,
Well, let's remember that there is a base ECS number that does not
right,
change.
you're right.
So it's only Alliance ECS that could potentially change. However, let's go back to my notes on fiscal impact. So the Alliance ECS allocation would, for next year, for 24-25,
Remain
would
the
be
same.
based on the 10-1-23 enrollment. That's
Correct.
current year enrollment. And the state would not know the K enrollment next year until
Right.
October 1 of 24.
Right.
Right.
And for the sake of this argument, Ms. Siegel, can we just
Yes.
assume stability in the numbers? So, because I'm trying to get like a number. So a per pupil loss to the budget, basically, what would we be looking at if we were to lose 441 students enrollment for the initial year of implementation?
Well, 441. Is just looking at a reasonable.
Yes.
And it's several. It could be several $1 million. I'm not sure exactly which parts of the all the parts of the formula that would necessarily apply. But the point is that I'm not anticipating any fiscal impact for next year, which is
Absolutely.
20.
Right. I'm sorry, but yeah, the point is for me to project out past this next fiscal year, because the sooner we attack the problem and the potential issues, the sooner we could get them. So.
Well, I agree and I understand, but I think, for 25-26, we're going to have accurate data because, again, I am presuming that there will be a formalized exception process in our district based upon the rules. Now, superintendent is reviewing the regulations, and superintendent will make the decisions.
Right.
But I'm presuming that parents will be able to submit a written request if if a parent determines that, in their estimation, the child is developmentally ready for kindergarten. And then, of course, there has to be a formal assessment to confirm the parents'.
Yeah, I understand all that. I'm looking at worst case scenarios. So my worst case scenario, okay, I'll drive this for a second. Let's assume conservatively we have a loss of $11,000 per pupil that's not enrolled. I know it's going to be probably more than that with the Alliance and other grants added onto our ECS. That equates to a potential, if nothing goes our way, close to $5 million drop. Exactly, 4,851,000. That's using the number if nothing changes by then and everything, all the numbers maintain stability.
Yes, well, as I said, it would be several $1 million. But right. I'm remaining optimistic. Again, there are so many factors. There's the factor of breakage. There's the factor that this situation of potentially losing kindergarten students and requiring fewer classes, that is a situation that every district would encounter, and every district would have the breakage issue that I described.
Absolutely.
So I'm presuming that every district in Connecticut would describe this situation to the legislators and advocate for retention of the classes, and if not retention of the classes, at a minimum, some factor built into the funding formula to allow for the breakage so that there can be stability.
Absolutely. And I absolutely agree with Siegel. And that's the whole point of this exercise right here now. So we could get on the ground and be one of those big voices, because we are the largest city with the largest impact for this. So things like advocacy and stuff take planning. And this is where I'm at right now. And
Yes,
and this is not just going to be an impact on fiscal year 25-26 as a worst case scenario. As these children matriculate through the first grade, the second grade, the third grade, the fourth grade, that cohort size is going to be smaller for 13 years following, assuming no changes in stability in that 4.4 number. I know it's not realistic, it's going to fluctuate up and down, but this is the worst case scenario. If nothing changes, if everybody stays quiet, if nobody advocates, if nobody still gets there. And impact over 13 years is 13 times 5. Oh my God, I forgot my math. $60-something million over time. So that's just that. And it's not only that impact. There's also the pre-K impact and impact on. Maybe you said about 60,000 per classroom is the law per class is the loss, if I'm not mistaken. I could be wrong on that number.
I'm sorry, what was the question?
The loss per pre-K classroom.
Oh, the excess cost factor to our district for a pre-K class is 60 to 80,000 per class.
Well, yeah, and that's significant, because presuming those 441 students have to go into our pre-K program, we're going to need more pre-K classes, so that'll increase the losses on there. And the interesting thing I find with this whole scenario is, like you said, the breakage in the class doesn't require less teachers or whatever have you. But even if it did, it would only need less kindergarten teachers for that year of implementation, because then everybody would equalize. The next fiscal year would be equalized of the students that are eligible for pre-K that were held back from the prior year. So even if we were able to reduce the number of kindergarten teachers, we would just have to bring them back the next year. And we want to be very careful before we do that, because if they go to another district, we can't get them back here. So we got to find some way to work that out as well, between maybe some things worked out with the bargaining unit to have it. I don't know. It's just a multifaceted monster.
Yeah. And keep in mind, for pre-K classes, fortunately, and I'm going to be reporting on this when I discuss the 23-24 fiscal condition, we are achieving our goals to a high degree, not at 100%, but very close, in regard to filling our pre-K seats. So that is a positive development compared to the prior year. Now, there are also many community sites, school readiness community sites, which are coordinated through Bridgeport as the fiduciary. I don't have the data on the number of seats filled in those sites, but my point is that there are numerous other community sites that are also available. But if there are 4-year-olds who will turn 5 by January 1, and if an exception is requested and it's not granted because a child is not developmentally ready based on the assessment, and if the parent wants to place that child in a pre-K program, and hypothetically, if there isn't a seat, it's not a simple matter for the district or a community provider to open a new class, because we would need state pre-K funding to do that.
Absolutely. Yeah, and
there would be an excess cost factor.
Right, absolutely. That I'm trying to get my mind around all of this. I try to keep a running total of the burn rate of our rainy day fund. For some reason, I just blanked on the term, but internal service fund.
Yes.
And the expiration of tax dollars. And this seems to be something that would accelerate it and switch the timeline. So I'm just trying to wrap my mind about the possible burn when everything crashes. And last point, a question. I sent the email document to be included in the packet. I don't know if you've seen it, Ms. Siegel. But there's there's more to the assessments than just the Brigands. It could be a partial tool, but the guidance from the state is a holistic approach. So it won't only be the Brigands. If the child actually doesn't do well in the Brigands, there are possibly other factors that can help the child out. And that's what something I would like us to be mindful of, not only for fiscal purposes, but for our parents who may not be able to afford a pre-K class, who needs their child in kindergarten, who may be ready. So this is why I'm bringing all this early, so these things could actually be discussed and on the radar and the board's radar, so we know what's coming, and so we could advocate. And once we get our lobbyists settled, it's probably one of their first tasks. Okay, Mr. Benahan, do you have any questions? I see your hand up. I'm sorry, I spoke so long. Where'd you go? Is he coming in?
I think he's coming in.
Okay, yeah, I'll pause. Okay, I'll go back around. Ms. Perez, did you think of any questions?
I'm good now.
Ms. Baptiste Perez, do you have any questions? I did see Mr. Benahan with his hand up, and I believe he's probably walking in the building right now. We got parking issues over here.
Yeah, it was up. He's not.
Right, okay, so we'll move along to the next section, and if Mr. Benahan comes in with questions, Dr. Morgan, do you have any questions?
I don't.
Okay, thank you. All right, I was trying to stall a little bit, but okay, we can move on to the next agenda item.
Start early since we know who's 25 and who's not.
The next item on the agenda is fiscal comparison of central office between
All right.
10-6.
Very good. I just need a moment to bring up the chart.
Yes, please, thank you.
Fiscal comparison,
Just central office.
like compared to.
Basically from
compare.
October 26th, because, no, wait, no, we're still on. We're still live, yeah. It's, just comparison, we've always had the unfortunate advocacy point of being able to advocate as one of the slimmest central offices. And I don't know if that's still a good talking point. And also that burn rate I spoke of. You all know central office is overburdened.
All right, so we provided a workbook with a chart that I keep, that I have been keeping every year, of the central office organization. And we put into this workbook the district organization for the current year and each of the last 4 years. Now, what I have up on the screen is the bottom section. I've hidden the columns with names in the top part. And I'm not going to show the top part because it has salary titles and salaries. I don't think that's appropriate for this meeting. So I'm just looking at the bottom section. And for last year, I'm also looking at the bottom section. Now I'll have a few comments on that in a moment. But I also want to just share a few other comments first. And that is in terms of the cost for central office staff or central office organization from year to year. So even if every position stayed stable, the cost would rise each year due to salary growth and health insurance growth. And the MERS rate, MERS rate, which pertains to the retirement rate for non-certified staff, that is also a factor. Now, there has been some good news, and that is that in 23-24, current year, we had been told previously that the MERS rate as of July 1, 23 would be 25.36%. So we had thought that it was going up from 21.58 in the prior year to 25.36. And of course, that was a significant increase. Well, we learned recently that there was a change made at the state level due to the amortization rates. And it is in the favor of municipalities and, of course, school districts. So this is a very positive development because that rate has now declined. So we were anticipating 25.36. It's now 20.39. And 20.39 is, in fact, even lower than the prior year's rate of 21.58. So this has resulted, when I put in that number, in savings in the district office organization alone, assuming every position were filled, of approximately $300,000. And I'll speak later in the meeting when I present the other report on the impact in the entire budget. Now, also in 23-24, there are multiple vacancies in the district office, the savings from which are offsetting the cost of new positions. So yes, there were new positions added: director of literacy, director of math, director of assessment, and others. But there were also positions that were eliminated and positions substituted. So right now we have 11 vacancies, not counting, I did not count the position that is vacant in the grants office that is designated as self-sustaining. That is a grant development administrator, which is a position designed to generate additional competitive grants, and those grants, presumably, if from the federal government or from foundations, would have indirect costs attached to them, and so the indirect cost could be applied to the salary. So that's a self-sustaining position. But right now, I'm counting 11 vacancies. So that's important to keep in mind. Now, of course, just as we want our positions in schools to be filled, we also would like our positions in the district office to be filled. But the reality is that, and particularly in a district as large as ours, in any year, there's usually going to be one or more positions vacant. 11 is a high number at this time. Now, as I mentioned, some positions were eliminated and others were added. So not all new positions result in additional costs. So for example, we removed a position for Director of Social Work. We removed Director of Counseling and Parent Partnerships. We removed the position for an assessment coordinator that was a teacher on special assignment. We added a Director of Athletics, Physical Education and Health. We added an Assistant Superintendent for Cell, Behavioral Wellness and Student Services. And we added a Director of Assessment, and we're adding an assessment specialist in the Data Management Office. And the Director of Assessment is a administrative position covered under the BCAS union, and the assessment specialist is a non-certified position in data management. So strictly on a headcount basis, we removed 3, we added 4. But it's important to keep in mind when we talk about additional positions that some of the additional positions are substitutes for positions that were eliminated. And currently, we are operating on a 2-year time horizon for fiscal sustainability for the current year and for 24-25. That's our time horizon because for 25-26, there are multiple uncertainties at this time. And so in fall of 24, which is next year, we would conduct the fiscal analysis that's required to plan for 25-26 based on the best, most current information available at that time. And at that time, we should be able to project the Alliance ECS and the city share additions as a projection because they would not be known until the spring. But we would have a more accurate estimate on the balance in the internal service fund at that time. And let's remember that the superintendent is engaged in vigorous advocacy efforts to secure equitable funding for Bridgeport. And we're going to remain hopeful about securing the resources required to maintain our operational structure. And by operational structure, I'm referring to the entire operational plan, not solely the district office positions, but all of the services in schools, of course. But concurrently, we have to be realistic about the necessity to plan for the possibility of a shortfall. And if a shortfall is projected, and I have said that I'm concerned about 25-26, at this point in time, I would expect a shortfall. However, all of the factors I mentioned may possibly produce the revenue that's needed. We don't know yet.
Right.
But if a shortfall is projected at that time, then we're going to examine the options for achieving a budget reduction with the least impact. And there are multiple strategies for achieving, budget reduction. So we're not going to discuss those tonight. But I just wanted to emphasize that when we talk about, additional positions, we have to understand that there were positions eliminated and others added. So not everything that's new results in additional cost. And in terms of the current year, we have achieved a savings through the reduction that occurred in the MERS rate. So that is very helpful. And we have multiple vacancies in the district office that are budgeted, but producing savings that are helping to offset that additional cost. So now I'm going to go back to the chart. And you can see that I've indicated in this chart an approximate cost factor of $16.5 million, keeping in mind that I use an estimate on health. I just take an average on health for the number of positions. And I use the same number, the same cost factor in 22-23 as in 23-24. But the MERS rate changes, and of course the salaries have changed. And then I add in an estimate on travel allowance. This may or may not be the accurate number for everyone who's entitled to a travel allowance. It's just an estimate. And we also make an estimate on those who may be entitled to longevity and payouts. And again, the actual number may be 20,000, but this is just an estimate. But in terms of comparison, if we go back to 22-23, you can see again the health is using the same factor, travel allowance the same, longevity is the same, because those are just factors to give an estimate of the final grand total. So last year was around 15 million, and now we're looking at 16.5. So when we look at that comparison, clearly it's about $1.5 million, and the cost of the net cost for the additional positions was originally around 900. However, we now have that savings from the MERS reduction, so it's around 600,000. And then the balance is resulting from the growth in salaries and Medicare that would be applicable to it. And so that's the reality. Now, let me just take this down for a second, because I'm not sure if I want to make sure that I'm not showing any information on the other slide. So just bear with me one moment, please.
Take your time.
Okay. So I do want to show you the other years. just take a second. Okay. That's good. Okay. Do this one. Okay. All right, so we looked at current year, we looked at last year. If we go back to 21, 22, 11.5, and then we're at 15, and 2021 is 9.9, and 1920 is 9.5. So 1920 was the first pandemic year. The pandemic occurred in March of 20. That was the initiation date. So 9.5. Then in 2021, the first pandemic year, we go up about 500,000. Now in 21, 22, let's see, around 10, about 1.5. And now in 22, 23, there were other positions included. And I think also in this year, I may have put in, included the part-time positions as well. So it may not be exactly equal to 21, 22, because we always seek to improve the reporting. So I may have included per diem and hourly positions that may not have been in the other years. I'd have to go back and look to check on that. But clearly there is growth in each year. So that is to be expected. We always have to cover escalated costs. So I think that we are in an excellent situation in the current year to support the superintendent's plan fiscally. And as I indicated, we're looking ahead to the planning for 24-25. And then in the fall of next year, we will have more accurate data than we have today in which to plan for 25-26. And just to reemphasize, I am anticipating at this time, based on current information and barring any unforeseen events, that we will remain structurally balanced in the current year and have a balanced budget in the new year, 24-25. However, balancing the budget next year will entail a withdrawal of reserves on deposit in the internal service fund. Thank you. Are there any questions?
Yeah, thank you, Ms. Siegel. For the moment, I'm going to break protocol a bit, but no rules or regulations or bylaws, and allow Mr. Benahan to ask any questions he had about the prior presentation. I know you had your hand up earlier.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I know Ms. Siegel gave a lot of information, but I have a two questions for you, Ms. Siegel.
Yes.
I know you speak about in the beginning about the pre-K and in the 5 years old to the the student go to the Bristol school. They always like that. It was 4.5 before it was always 5 years old. Student had to be in for kindergarten in Bristol school. And my second question for you is, do we have a list that we can try to help the parents? But I know when the parents, they think they can register the kid at 4.5 or something because the sibling is in the school, that we can let them know where they can go, for pre-K for Bristol school?
Thank you for those questions. Number one, the current law that's in effect for 23-24 allows for a child who will be age 5 on or before January 1 of 24 to attend kindergarten. So the prior law is in effect this year, which means that if a child is currently on October 25th, age 4, but will be age 5 by January 1 of 24, that child may indeed be in a kindergarten class in our district. Now, the law has changed starting in the 24-25 school year, and the new law states that a child must be age 5 by September 1, not January 1 of 24 in order to enter a kindergarten class in 24-25. The law also specifies an exception process, which, according to the rules that I've seen and that are in the document I shared, are number 1, the parent has to submit a written request, and number 2, the child has to take an assessment and pass that assessment. Now, in regard to the second question, there is planning underway at the district level under the superintendent's jurisdiction to review the rules, understand the exception process, and I am presuming that there will be an action plan produced soon. I cannot speak for the superintendent, but I know that there is planning underway. So I am presuming this evening that there will be, an action plan that will specify in a timeline for parents the registration dates for kindergarten and the process whereby if a child will be age 5 by January 1 rather than September 1, and if the parent believes that the child is developmentally ready for kindergarten, the parent can submit a written request and take their child to the school for an assessment that would be conducted under, and again, I'm presuming, standardized guidelines that would be issued under the superintendent's jurisdiction by the early childhood department. And kindergarten registration begins in the early spring. And so the timeline would provide the guidance to parents on the regulation, on the exception process, and on the steps that they should take by specified dates in order to request an exception if they so choose. And if they decide not to seek an exception because they think their child should enter kindergarten a year later, they may want to enroll their child in a pre-K program. So again, presumably there would be information provided on the pre-K programs that are available. And as these assessments take place and the decisions are generated, I'm presuming that there would be some type of automated process so that we could capture at the central level the number of assessments done and the number that resulted in admissions and the number that resulted in declinations. And then we would have the data, and parents would have ample time for decision making. If they request an exception, they would know in ample time whether that exception was approved, and if it wasn't, what their options would be for a 4-year-old program if they so choose.
Thank you, Ms. Siegel. Appreciate your information. The sad thing is when they change the law, the people that are suffering is our parents and our students. All right, thank you, Ms. Siegel, for information.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. No more questions.
All right, thank you. Now back to the current topic. Ms. Perez, do you have any questions?
have no questions.
I have one question, Ms. Siegel. Is it possible to get a quick calculation of the rate, the increased percentage between 2020 and 2024, please?
1920? Okay.
Yes, thank you.
Sure. Sure. Let me just do that on screen.
Make sure we do it right. 17% if I'm right.
Okay, so that's it's an increase of $7 million over the over 4 years. 4 years, and it's 7 million over 9.5, so 74.3% growth.
Thank you. That doesn't feel right, Ms. Siegel.
Well, again, there may be certain positions in certain offices, like facilities, that I may have added later on,
Right.
but I don't have time to go back and
Ms. Siegel.
check. So
Right,
that, that's a possibility. I think the best comparison is between 24 and 23. And that I feel comfortable in saying is, rather accurate, because both charts should have, the same positions.
Ms. Siegel, pause for just a second. I just want to clarify something in my head. A 74% growth rate would mean we almost doubled in the salaries of the office, correct?
Well, there were positions added as well.
Right, 74. Okay, so.
Well, this is over, it's over a 5-year period. It's 4 intervals.
Right, hold on, let me see. Because I was coming up like 18 to 20. Okay, I don't.
Well,
what was 1920's expenditure number that you're using, ma'am?
About 9.5.
9.5. And what number are you using for 24, please?
About 16.5.
Oh wow, so it is that. Well, yeah, because I was using the bottom numbers and it came. Okay.
But look, as I said, it could be that in one of the years I may not have had all of the we have some staff developers who work for us on a per diem basis, a few days a week. In the math department, for example, I may not have had that included in one of the years. I don't know. I didn't have time to go back and check. But I'm just using that as an example to indicate that there could be some variance across the years. But I think 24 and 22, 23 are, I'm not going to say 100% comparable, but generally comparable. I actually have to go back to last year as well. But I wanted to make sure that 23, 24 had all of the relevant lines. But even so, you asked about the difference. Well, it's about 7 million. Put aside the percentage for a minute. That's about 1.7 million per year. Right. Which is not unreasonable, because look at what happened here. We had about 15, and now we're going to 16 and a half. So that's 1.5 alone.
Right. So would it be safe to say about 18% per year increase, or somewhere around thereabouts?
Yes, just bear with me a second. I'm just looking at the MERS rate. And you can see here the MERS rate was 16.39. Then it goes up to 19.05. And then it goes up to 21.58. So that is going to impact the non-certified staff. So a 74% divided by 4 on average, about 18.6% per year.
Okay, thank you. That's all the questions I have. Anybody else have any questions on this topic? Hearing none, Ms. Siegel, you may move on to the next topic, which I believe is the 23-24. I'm sorry, could you tell me, please? Because I lost my
Budget.
page.
The 23-24 budget update.
Thank you. Yes, please proceed.
Thank you. So just take me a moment to bring up the next document.
Sure thing. And I shall take this moment. All right for me. Thank you.
All right, are we ready?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. All right, so in terms of the 23-24 fiscal condition, the financial condition report as of October 31 is in development, and it will be finalized and posted on November 1st, next week. With regard to the internal service fund, so when I presented the end of year close and the gap plan for this year, I indicated that we put in a placeholder for a withdrawal from the internal service fund reserves of 12 million. And I clearly stated that that hopefully was going to be a maximum number and that the actual number would most likely be between 6 and 12 million. Now, at this time, when we're completing the first formal fiscal forecast as of October 31, the projected withdrawal is going to range between 7.5 and 9.5 million. So I'm lowering the threshold from 6 to 12 to 7.5 to 9.5. The number that we currently have, barring any unforeseen circumstances between now and when I post, is 9 million. Can it go lower? Yes, but that will depend upon a multitude of factors that will influence the budget between now and the end of year. But we feel comfortable in lowering the range at this time. But keep in mind, I always issue a caveat, which is that the projection could increase or it could decrease during the fiscal year. And also I mentioned the positive development with the MERS rate, that it was reduced from what we expected at 25.36 to 20.39. And I indicated earlier that that resulted in savings in the district office alone, about 300,000. Now, across the entire operating budget, it's about 1.3, and across the grants, 0.5. And in fact, as I mentioned earlier, that rate of 20.39 is lower than the prior year rate of 21.58. So this is an extremely positive development. Now, I have inquired about what to expect for next year, and the response was to project at this point at around 20.5. Now, could that go higher? Yes. But the thought is that with the new amortization structure that the state created, the rate hopefully will stay stable. So that is, again, an extremely positive development and very helpful in budget planning. Now, I'd just like to share a few observations and trends so that you have data. Our average teacher salary is growing. I went back and looked at the October payroll of prior years and the payroll of the current year on October 13th. And the current average salary is 78,491. That's with 1,491.2 positions. Last year it was 76,351, and the prior year 73,949. So obviously we do expect it to grow as step movement occurs, and the salary table is implemented. But we do have an average salary of about 78.5. And that will vary during the course of the year, depending upon various factors that influence salaries. Now, the transportation costs are increasing by 4.25%, as we know, in year 2 of the new 5-year agreement with We Transport. Our special ed costs are continuing to rise. We've been discussing with the superintendent review of special education and options that may emerge from the review to potentially introduce strategies or structures that could potentially achieve compliance, of course, and be in the best interests of students and staff, but also be cost effective. But what do the data show? So as of 10/1/23, which again was Friday, September 29th, our total enrollment was 19,294. The sped enrollment was 3,669. So that's 19.02%. Now, that's 61 students higher than this time last year. 61 students higher than this time last year. Now, it's lower than the number we had in June, but historically, the number grows during the course of the year. Perhaps this year will be different. But right now, it's 19.02%. We have continued to have a higher level of speech service needs. And there are 12 special ed teachers in ESSER grants who have to be placed in the operating budget in 24-25 unless there's a decline in the need for service. We have 74 individual one-to-one paras currently. So many of most of these items I've discussed in the past, but I did want to bring to your attention that the current percentage is 19.02%. And we are building into our 24-25 plan the mandated services in ESSER that have to now be sustained in the operating budget or in other grants. Now, we're still waiting for more information on the state special ed excess cost allocation for the out-of-district students. We were told last spring that the total state appropriation was increased by $25 million. That, of course, is for the entire state. And this may benefit us if the local share percentage, known as the cap, is reduced, but the outcome will be dependent upon the number of students and the cost factors statewide. So we may not know whether or not there is a benefit until late January, when the first analysis is released. But we're keeping this in mind as a potential avenue for increased revenue. Now, if we do have higher level, that increase is going to be applied first and foremost to offset the growth in sped expenses. It's going to be applied to special education. Just as a refresher, when we have an out-of-district placement, we have to pay 4.5 times our NCEP, plus the cap times the difference between the total cost and the 4.5 times the NCEP. Okay. Now, before I discuss the English language learners, I'm actually going to scroll down to NCEP because there was a new report issued in October of 23 for last year. Now, usually it is the January report that determines the cost factor for the current year. So there may be another report coming, but what's interesting is this October report, which pertains to 22-23, shows for Bridgeport an NCEP of 16,503. Now, that is lower than last year's number, and you'll recall that I indicated that the number was higher last year, presumably due to the infusion of the ESSER funds. Now, we still have ESSER grants at a lower level than in the past, but we still have them. So this number looks low, and there may be, a January report that would be that would have a slightly different number. But if it's 16,503, then we would have to pay 74,165 as the base for an out-of-district placement, and then the cap times the balance of the cost, and the cap in 22-23, which was last year, was 23.65%. So we're hoping that the cap is reduced, right? And then the state pays the balance. Now, English language learners. So we are a district with high needs due to many factors, but two of those factors are special education and English language learners. And as of 10/1/23, our L enrollment was 5,540 students. That is 28.71% of total enrollment, 28.71. That's 512 students higher than last year at this time, and 207 students higher than in June.
5% higher.
Right, so that is significant. And the next two items I've discussed in the past, this is repetitious, but we've added English ESL teachers, obviously, because we've needed them in order to service the children. And we've added over 13 positions in 4 years. And we've also added bilingual program assistants. That's a type of paraprofessional position that's funded in Title I. And we have increased 4 positions in 4 years. And these are services that we will have to maintain for the high level of ELL students, assuming the level continues. So I think I've covered everything so far. All right, now I'd like to move on to the Fairchild Wheeler campus enrollment and magnet grant revenue. And so you can see in this chart that at Fairchild Wheeler, the you can see that the total enrollment, I have a summary here, is 1,100, and that went up by 9 compared to the prior year, and the suburban enrollment is 288, and that went up by 30 compared to the prior year. Now, the total change in revenue for the current year is 165,051. So this is a positive development. For the first time, we are achieving a significant growth in revenue. However, if we look at our 3 high schools, you will see that for residency standard, which means 25%. We have to have a minimum of 25% suburban students. Infotech, Information Technology High School, met the standard with 30.7. Zoological and aerospace did not. They're coming close. They're coming closer. And we're very pleased to see the progress. And we appreciate all the efforts that have been made. But they didn't meet the standard. Now, the state has waived the penalty in prior years, particularly the pandemic years. We do not know yet whether the state is going to waive the penalty again in 23-24. If they don't waive the penalty will be $30,600, 16,830 at zoological and 13,770 for aerospace. Okay. And what is the penalty? The penalty is the difference between the residency standard and 25%. Multiplied by the enrollment, because that represents the additional Bridgeport students who technically are occupying suburban seats. And the state is not going to fund us for the excess Bridgeport students. Okay. All right, so suburban enrollment is up, and that was our goal. Obviously, it's not up high enough, but it's a step in the right direction. And again, I want to acknowledge the work that was done at the school level and at the district level to help accomplish this outcome. And we appreciate, the efforts of everyone involved, including the principals. But I'm reporting the facts, and this is a positive sign that the recruitment efforts may finally be producing an upward trend, and we would look forward to next year and hope that there's continued growth. Now, with that said, the shortfall in the magnet grant, in the high school magnet grant, and shortfall last year was 1.7 million that we had to cover in our budget. For this year, we're in the process of working on the forecast, so I don't have an accurate number today, but I was projecting around 2 million originally with 165,000. It may be around 1.8. I'm hopeful it might be lower, but I don't know tonight the exact forecast, right? But overall, there are positive developments occurring. Now, with that said, all three schools didn't meet the racial isolation standard. So they have to reach 25%, and you can see they're at 21.34, 20.22, 23.08. So what does that mean? It means they're going to have to update their corrective action plans. That's our expectation. Right? And that basically concludes the brief report on the 23-24 condition with the information that is available at this time. And the next topic is 24-25 planning information. So
Yeah, Ms. Siegel,
I'll
if you
stop
could
at
please.
this point.
Okay, thank you. I was just going to ask that. Ms. Perez, do you have any questions on this? Mr. Benahan?
No question, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
I've got one question as far as the magnet schools. We are operating at a net loss, basically on a per pupil basis. Can you explain that? Because there's sometimes a narrative out there that we're actually pulling money from the magnet schools instead of putting it in. So can you explain that a little further, please?
Yes. So we have a state magnet grant. We have a magnet grant for Discovery Magnet, and we have a grant for the 3 high schools, Fairchild Wheel Campus. Now, in that, the magnet grants were never intended to fund the entire cost of a school. And so there is an operating budget contribution, of course, and it's roughly 60-40, 55-45 in terms of teacher distribution. But what I have done over the last few years, when enrollment started to decline, is I've kept the same number of positions in the magnet grant. So over the years, what has happened? Costs have escalated, salaries increase, health benefits increase, and there are other factors that impact on cost. And so as those costs increase, if revenue stays stable or declines, a deficit occurs. And it was a great concern to the district over the last several years that enrollment was declining. And let's remember that this that the Fairchild Wheeler campus was constructed to hold up to 1,500 students, with up to 500 per high school. You can see that the enrollment at Infotech is 404, at Zoological 366, and at Aerospace 330. So the enrollment today is far lower than it was when the schools first opened, almost, I think, 10 plus years ago. Okay. So
Thank you.
I've kept the number of positions stable in the magnet grant so that I could demonstrate the extent of the shortfall. Also, with that said, if you look at the amounts that we receive, the per capita amounts, when the schools first opened, the amount for a Bridgeport student was $3,000, and the amount for a suburban student, I think, was around $7,000. I don't recall exactly. And then there's been only one increase, from $3,000 to $3,060, and from $7,000 to $7,227. Right. So revenue, the per capita revenue at the state level has not kept pace with inflationary factors.
Thank you, Ms. Siegel. That adequately answers my question. Can we, any other questions?
No, sir.
Can we move on to the next presentation, please? Thank you.
All right, thank you. So I wanted to share the transition plan and some of the items in my presentation I did cover previously, so I'll move through those quickly, but they're part of a comprehensive transition plan, which is in turn part of the comprehensive planning process for 24-25. And so what are we doing first and foremost in 23-24? Well, we are aiming to optimally conserve operating resources, and we are in the final year of ARP ESSER, so we're optimizing the use of our ESSER funds in all of the ESSER grants. We have our main grant, and then we have some subsidiary grants that are much smaller, but nevertheless are helpful. And within the guidelines, we are conserving operating resources, and we're retaining reserves in the ISF, which basically means we want to lower the ISF withdrawal to balance the operating budget to the extent that we can. So that's our goal. And we're accomplishing that by optimizing the use of the ESSER grant funds within the guidelines. And we're also continuing to aim to optimize the rollover of funds in other grants that allow for rollover within the 15% cap. And again, to the extent possible. And that would be Title I, Title II, Title III, Title IV, and IDEA. Now, it's important for everyone to understand, why do we roll over money? Why is that a beneficial action to aim to take? Well, first of all, we have to be prepared in the case of a grant reduction, because we have staff in these grants. These grants are critical to our fiscal plan. And so we have to be prepared for a reduction. We had a reduction in Title I this year of close to $400,000, but we absorbed it easily because we had rolled money. So that's number one. Number two, we want to achieve a level of fiscal stability, which basically means we want to fund the escalated costs of the personnel in those grants with money from that grant. And so by rolling money, we have funding for the escalated costs. And number three, we want to be prepared for an emergency that could occur, because if there's a need that emerges and operating resources aren't available, we may be able to draw on the grants within the grant guidelines. Next, we are optimizing revenue streams. So we want to reverse the losses in state pre-K and in the interdistrict magnet grants. So we just spoke about the interdistrict magnet grant for Fairchild Wheeler, and we think we've turned the tide. We think we finally have reversed the losses and we're on an upward path. So that is positive. With regard to pre-K, we want to fill all of our pre-K seats every month so we can optimize the pre-K revenue and reduce the excess costs that we have to charge to Title I. So I spoke about that earlier, and I said, you know, for this year, it's between $1.6, $1.8 million. And that's the cost of the teachers and the paras above the revenue that we get, which is 108 per class, and in fact, 75,000 per class in Smart Start. And by doing that, we can fund the position, if everything goes according to my plan, we can fund the position of Director of Early Childhood Education, which is currently in the ESSER grant in Title I next year. So what happened today? Well, the pre-K report showed we have only one open full-day seat. We do have eight half-day seats open at Skane, and I know the Director of Early Childhood and the CAO are both working to fill those seats. And we spoke about the high school magnet grant. We want that upward trend to continue. We want to continue to increase enrollment through program enhancement and communications marketing strategies. We want to reduce that deficit in the grant. Now, we also have to plan for the change in the state law on magnet tuition. So I spoke about this in June. So what do we know at this time? Well, we know that the state budget adopted in the spring legislates the phase out of tuition, legislates the billing of local school districts for general ed tuition. And so beginning next year, 24-25, we can only charge 58% of the amount charged in the previous year. So magnet tuition is separate and apart from the state grant that we received, the revenue grant. So for aquaculture, for example, the director has already calculated 58% of this year's tuition in order to calculate the tuition that will be due for next year, and has shared that information with the sending districts, which requested it. We charge $3,000 per student with a maximum of $150,000 for 50 students to our sending districts. So we are going to have a maximum of $1,740 for next year, and we will have to notify them that the magnet tuition for next year will be $1,740. However, the state is expected to disperse additional funds to magnet and agri-science operators to make the district whole for the loss of the tuition revenue. So that's what we're expecting. And we were in fact contacted by the Connecticut School State Finance Project to ask for our data, because they are working on behalf of the districts to contact the state and advocate for this statement to be actualized. So we're not expecting, we're expecting to charge less for tuition, but for the state to make us whole, right? Now, ultimately, and presumably it happens after 24-25, ultimately when magnet tuition is phased out fully, what could that mean? So I'm interpreting the law, and I showed you this chart. I have not changed the chart, but I showed you this chart in June, and I calculated for last year what we paid out, and then what districts paid us. And we paid out more than we took in for tuition. So if we no longer have to pay tuition, we should actually come out ahead. And the state at that point is expected to also increase the per capita amount in the magnet grant, right? So hypothetically, if this were to happen, we could end up with another $500,000, and the per capita revenue could also potentially increase. That is what is anticipated. So this is a potential scenario. And if it happens, of course, we would use that to first cover the deficit in the grant. It's not going to buy additional services at the schools. It's going to cover the shortfall so that we can release our funding in the operating budget for other critical services that will be needed after the end of ESSER and after that post-ESSER year. Moving on, we also have to be mindful about the Alliance Diversity Grant, because this year 7%, which was about $232,000, was diverted from Alliance to the Increasing Educated Diversity Grant. So we're glad to have the money for that purpose, increasing educated diversity. And keep in mind, there are very specific guidelines that apply. So, but for next year, if we were to receive $8 million more in Alliance ECS, and if that 7% were applied, we would then have $560,000 removed from our Alliance allocation, and that would reduce the operating budget, right? So, you know, we may gain in one area and lose in another in terms of operating costs. Now, on a positive note, depending on the amount we receive for next year, which in turn is dependent on the percentage that's set by the state, we may be able to incorporate the in-school peer support program that's currently in ESSER. You may be able to incorporate that into this Increasing Educated Diversity Grant, because the grant does have, within the very strict guidelines, a provision that allows for professional development. So if we're able to do that, then we would have continuity of that particular program, but we would have, in this scenario, $560,000 less for critical operating needs in the operating budget. So that, you know, is of concern. And then, of course, we're taking into account the kindergarten law, which we covered in depth in this meeting. And keep in mind, as I have mentioned repeatedly, that there are mandated services, particularly in special ed and in English language learner services, in the ESSER grants. And if the need does not decline, we now have to fund those services. So these are services, most of the services, not all, are services that did not exist before ESSER. So they emerged as a result of the pandemic. The need currently still exists. It has not declined. If it stays stable moving into next year, we have to fund it. And in this $7 million, I've also included contracted psychologists and speech services, which we were able to fund in ESSER. So that's an example of where we're able to reduce, you know, operating costs. And we are also funding substitute teacher services in various categories with ESSER. And that was allowable based on the guidelines. And we have to bring all of these services into the operating budget. So that will add to the monetary need for next year. And then we are also maximizing, aiming to maximize revenue through advocacy. So we know the City Council did increase the city share in the current year from 2 million to 2.5 million. We're hopeful it will go up again for next year. And for 24-25, the state ECS, based on last year's biennium budget, was projected at 8 million. That's prior to the percentage reduction for the diversity grant. But that's not enough. That's not enough to close the gap, because the increase over the last 8 to 9 years, on average in revenue, operating revenue, has been only 1.25%. percent per year. We're looking at potential cost savings. Now, we did better than expected on utilities last year, and we thought that was due to a mild winter. We may or may not have another mild winter. It was also due to energy efficiency upgrades and energy conservation measures. Those are the three factors that we think contributed to the outcome. It was a positive outcome. In the current year, we are expecting an increase because we know that the electricity rates increased. However, the rate that was negotiated by the city should remain stable into next year. And so we're hoping for stability, at least in the electrical area, for next year. And the facilities team is working with the schools on promoting energy conservation measures. So we're working on it. Transportation, we have reached out to We Transport and their parent company known as Beacon to explore potential cost savings for next year. I'm not able to report on any major developments at this time, but we are reaching out to them. And moving on, in regard to the ESSER grant in particular, with the main grant, which ends September 30th, we are optimizing and leveraging the use of our funds to maximal benefit through September 30th. So while we closed ESSER 2 as of June 30th, we're going to keep ESSER 3 or ARP ESSER open through the end of September so that we can leverage our funds to reduce cost for 3 months of the new year, 24-25. So how does that work in practice? Well, we're going to fund the cost of any non-certified positions in ARP ESSER through September 30th. We built that into our plan. We're going to fund the summer programs that we funded and temporary IT technician support into the summer and into September for the IT technicians. We're continuing to purchase for any new curriculum developments, any new curriculum initiatives, multi-year agreements.
I'm leaving back in 2 minutes.
Multi-year agreements. We're preparing for the reduction in positions. So as attrition and personnel movements occur, we're not refilling positions to the extent possible so that we can minimize the number of excess employees in the spring. 24, this should say 24. And as funds become available due to attrition, we are redeploying the funds to provide alternate services not involving full-time personnel. So we're trying to reduce the number of positions that would be in excess, which is in everyone's best interest. We're preparing for the end of temporary services. What are some examples? Well, we had funding for extended day programs. We're not going to have those funds next year based on current information. We had agreements with Effective School Solutions, with Kirby Youth, with the various youth partnership programs. You know, those programs were in existence for 3 years. The funding will end. However, we are securing new grants to continue designated services, and we are continuing an active search to find and apply for new grant opportunities that could extend services for 1 or more years. And I'm pleased to report we have had some success. And so I did mention previously at prior meetings the federal trauma grant that we expect to have available next year. That's a 1-year grant only, but it will enable 2 guidance counselors and 2 social workers to be funded at least for 1 more year. And then we have a Stronger Connections grant from the state, which will allow funding next year and the following year. So that's for 2 years. And that will enable 3 social workers in each year. So far, we believe we have funding to maintain 5 social worker positions out of the 10 and at least 2 guidance counselors. And I'm looking at other options with our grants office, and Nadira Clark is the director, and she's on the call. So we're looking at many other options. Now, we also funded the FAME Academy in Esser. We think there's a grant opportunity for the National Endowment for the Arts. It wouldn't be the full amount, but it would be partial if we're successful in the competition. We won't know until it's announced in the spring. So that's a prospect that we're optimistic about, but there isn't any guarantee. And then we're looking towards foundations for possible funding of cell-related services, and that would allow us to redeploy Title IV-A funds. So grant opportunities are critical. We're continuing the search. We're remaining optimistic. We're not anticipating we're going to be able to maintain every ESSER service that is regarded as essential to maintain or important to maintain at the same level. With that said, we also have other priorities for seeking resources for retention of services. And those priorities would include the temporary para support in the kindergarten classes, 1 for every 2 classes. We're also looking at the what are known as the easy teacher positions, where EASI is elementary academic support instructor. And those positions are particularly critical in smaller elementary schools that don't have as many intervention opportunities. So we are very clear on our priorities. We're focused on those priorities. We're taking every possible step to try to secure supplemental resources through grants to fund those priorities. When we present the 24-25 budget request, it will have built in certain services that are approved by the superintendent. In other words, it will include services that superintendent has indicated should be continued, and that the cost of those services will be a factor in determining the monetary need, along with the other factor that I mentioned tonight, which is the transfer in of the mandated services that have to continue unless the need subsides from ESSER. And then the other factor impacting 24-25 that I've mentioned to you previously is, of course, the escalated costs for salaries, for health insurance, for transportation, for special education, potentially, and utilities, apart from electric, which I hope will stay stable based on the information we have today. Thank you. Are there any questions?
Thank you, Ms. Siegel. Ms. Perez?
Questions?
Mr. Benham?
No, thank you.
I have one. Could we back up to the magnet school grants and breakdowns for those, please?
Over
Thank
here?
you.
Or?
Yes, ma'am.
Oh, yes.
Based on, oh wait, hold on. Yes. Now further up, please, with the inflows. 203 schools. Yeah, okay, it's irrelevant. I'm looking for the calculations where you got the net impact of like 561 plus or something like that.
Yes, so that is this chart.
Yes, 517,000. Yes. The question I have about that is, are these calculations used if we have is it based on numbers of enrollment today or potentially filling all 1,500 seats of Fairchild Wheeler? And how does that change the calculations?
No, this was based on 22-23. And in terms of inflow, the amounts that the districts paid us magnet tuition, 729, pertain to 3,000 per student for the suburban students who attended Discovery and the Fairchild Wheeler High Schools last year.
Right, so if we were to
Right.
fill every seat, we would necessarily get probably 25% of those would be out of district students. So I'm just
Well,
wondering if the cost savings
So,
follows through, if we were fully enrolled in those schools, in our schools.
yeah, I don't have the chart for magnet tuition for this year up. Remember, there's a maximum of 150,000 for districts that have more than 50 students. So I
Right.
can't get the number from here. I do have the chart calculated, I just don't recall the exact number, but let's suppose it were, 800,000. So then, of course, the total would increase in this column, right? And I don't have yet the data on the outflow for this year to 6-6, agri-science and RCA,
Right.
right? But
Okay, that's adequate, Ms. Siegel.
I would just say, I think it's reasonable to anticipate that regardless of the exact numbers for 23, 24, that there would be a net positive impact.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Ms. Siegel. Very good, very thorough presentation as always. Is there any further questions for Ms. Siegel? Hearing none, I believe that brings us to the end. That was the 24-25 plannings. Therefore, Ms. Siegel, do you have any final notes?
No, thank you.
All right, so then I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
To adjourn.
And I shall second. Thank you, everybody. Thank you to Ms. Siegel and her staff, who's always very professional and sometimes in the background. But your work is recognized. And all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you, everybody. Get home safe and have a great night.
Have a good night, everyone. God bless you all.
Thank you. Good night.